My son wiped the grease from his hands and smiled, telling me he had just checked my brakes for the mountain trip. I wanted to believe him. But 3 hours later, my fingers brushed against cold plastic hidden under the chassis, a tracker. When the police called shortly after, the silence in my kitchen screamed louder than any siren. He thought he set a trap for me, but he only tightened the noose around his own neck. My name is Margaret Caldwell, but everyone in Harbour Bend calls me Maggie. At 58 years old, I thought I knew the sound of my own home, the way the floorboards settled in the winter, the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator, the silence that fell over the neighborhood after 10 at night. But tonight, the garage hummed with a tension that did not belong there. It was nearly 11 o'clock on a Friday night in our quiet suburb of Colorado. The air outside was thin and cold, biting at the edges of the window frames. I pushed open the door connecting the kitchen to the garage, expecting darkness, and froze. My son, Ryan, was crouched beside the rear wheel of my old SUV. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed angrily, casting long, sharp shadows against the concrete floor. He jumped slightly when the door latch clicked, his shoulders hiking up toward his ears. He turned quickly, wiping greasy hands on a rag that looked far too clean to be useful for real work. "Ryan," I asked, my voice echoing off the metal tools hanging on the pegboard wall. "What are you doing out here so late? You scared me half to death." He stood up, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was a smile I had seen 1,000 times since he was a boy, usually when he was trying to hide a bad grade or a broken vase. "Hey, Mum. I was just checking the brakes." The brakes, I repeated, stepping down onto the cold concrete in my slippers. "Yeah," he said, tossing the rag onto the workbench with a little too much force. "You are driving up to Red Mesa this weekend, right? That pass is brutal this time of year. I just wanted to make sure, that you are safe. I would hate for you to get stuck up there." It was a sweet sentiment, one that should have warmed my chest. Red Mesa was notorious in the state. Every winter, the local news reported cars sliding off the cliffs or brakes, failing on the steep, winding decline. But as I stepped closer, the smell hit me. It was not the usual scent of old gasoline and dust that lived in this garage. It smelled sharp, acrid, like burnt rubber mixed with something chemical. I looked down at the floor. A fresh, dark smear of oil pooled near his heavy work boot, glistening under the light. "I thought you hated this car," I said, trying to keep my tone light, though a prickle of unease ran down my spine. "You always call it a rust bucket." Ryan laughed, but it sounded brittle, hollow. "I do hate it, but I love you." "Mum." I tightened the calipers. "You are good to go." He avoided my gaze, focusing intently on scrubbing a spot of grease from his thumb. "I am going to head out. Need to get some sleep before my shift tomorrow." "Thank you, honey," I said, though the words felt heavy on my tongue. He brushed past me, smelling of sweat and that strange metallic tang. "Night, Mom. Drive safe." "Okay." The heavy door slammed shut behind him with a finality that made me flinch. I stood alone in the silence. The garage felt colder than before, the air thick with things unsaid. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the shadows. My mind kept replaying the scene. Ryan never touched my car unless he had to borrow it. And even then, he complained about the suspension. Why would he spend his Friday night under a chassis covered in grime? I turned on my side, pulling the quilt tighter. I had spent my life caring for others, for 30 years. I worked as a nurse at Briarfield Home Care, changing bedpans and holding the hands of strangers as they took their last breaths. I scrimped and saved, investing every spare dollar into buying rundown properties in the area, fixing them up, and renting them out. I was the woman who endured, the woman who sacrificed. I was the mother who forgave everything. My husband, Thomas, used to tell me I carried the world on my shoulders. 10 years ago, Thomas died on a stretch of highway just outside of Denver. A truck lost control. Brake failure. Since that day, the smell of burning tires made me nauseous. I became obsessed with vehicle maintenance, terrified of the very machine that took him from me. I closed my eyes, remembering Thomas's face in the hospital room, pale and fading. "Promise me, Maggie," he had whispered, his voice barely a rattle in his chest. "Promise me Ryan will always have a safe roof over his head. Do not let him struggle like we did, I promise." I had wept. "I promise. I will take care of him." That vow was the reason I was driving to Red Mesa. I was going to the lake house to prepare the final paperwork. I intended to transfer the deed to Ryan. It was a gift worth nearly $500,000. I wanted to give him the security I promised his father. I wanted to believe that the greasy hands and the late-night visit were acts of love from a son who appreciated his mother. I wanted to believe I was raising a good man, not a stranger. But the knot in my stomach would not loosen. It felt like a stone, heavy and cold. At 2 a.m, I threw the covers off. I grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand and walked downstairs in my bare feet. The house was silent, but my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened the garage door again. The SUV sat there, a hulking shadow in the gloom. I clicked the flashlight on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the rear tire where Ryan had been working. I knelt on the cold concrete. I did not know what I was looking for. I just knew that the mother in me, the part that usually overflowed with blind trust, was suddenly screaming at me to look closer. I reached out, my hand trembling, and shone the light into the wheel well, suspended between the comfort of denial and the terrifying edge of the truth. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the garage, letting the flashlight beam die out, and allowed my mind to drift back to when this house was just a blueprint of hope. I was 40 years old when Thomas and I left Ohio for Harbor Bend. We loaded everything we owned into a rental truck, chasing the promise of fresh mountain air and a booming market for home care services. We worked 18 hours a day, scraping together every cent to buy rundown properties, fix the leaking roofs ourselves, and rent them out. We were building a legacy, brick by hard-earned brick. Ryan was a teenager then, a scruffy boy with messy brown hair and a smile that could charm the anger right out of you. He was never good with books. He spent his afternoons tinkering with engines, his hands always stained with oil. I used to worry about his grades, but Thomas would just laugh and ruffle the boy's hair. "Let him be. Maggie," Thomas would say, his voice full of that easy patience I missed so much. "He is just a boy. He needs time to find his own gear." Not everyone is built for college, but Thomas never got to see if Ryan found that gear. 10 years ago, a semi-truck lost its brakes on the interstate outside of Denver. It smashed into our sedan. Thomas died instantly. Ryan was 21 at the time. He dropped out of vocational college the week after the funeral. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hands, and told me, "It is just Fate. Mom, you cannot fight destiny. Instead of going back to school, he got a job as a mechanic at Mountain Crest Auto. He became obsessed with cars, treating them with a reverence he never showed people. And I, drowning in the guilt of surviving when my husband did not, threw myself into work. I expanded our rental portfolio, obsessively padding a retirement account and a separate fund. I intended to surprise Ryan with one day. Nora Blake, my best friend and a sharp-tongued lawyer of 63, was the one who forced me to look at the grim reality of estate planning. She sat me down in her office, surrounded by stacks of legal paper. You need the Caldwell Living Trust. Maggie. Nora had said, tapping a pen against her desk, you cannot just hand everything over. We need conditions. Clauses about respect and responsibility. That seems a bit harsh. Nora, I had replied, feeling uncomfortable. He is my son. He is a man now, Nora countered. And men do stupid things. Nora was also the paranoid one. After a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, she bullied me into installing a high-end security system. We put small cameras and microphones in the garage, the kitchen, and the backyard. She even made me sign up for a vehicle tracking service called SafeTrack. It is for safety, she insisted. If your car gets stolen, you will thank me. I agreed, just to make her stop talking. But I rarely checked the feeds. For the first few years after Thomas died, I did not need to watch Ryan. He was a good son. He came over for dinner every night, fixed my car for free, and spent weekends maintaining the lake house at Lake Briar, the place where his father taught him to fish. Then he met Kelsey. Kelsey was a receptionist at a high-end spa downtown. She was pretty in a sharp, manufactured way, always scrolling through social media and talking about the lifestyle she deserved. The change in Ryan was slow, but poisonous. The family dinners became once a month, then once a season. He started making comments about my spending, about how the rental income was sitting there doing nothing. Mom, he would say over a hurried lunch. Kelsey says modern Americans do not wait until they are 70 to inherit. It is about leveraging assets while you are young. It is my retirement. Ryan, I would remind him gently. But the worst moment, the one that was replaying in my head now as I sat in the dark garage, happened 6 months ago. Kelsey had been drinking white wine in my living room, looking at photos of the lake house. She laughed, a tinkling sound that lacked any real warmth. You know, Maggie, you really should put the deed in Ryan's name now. Avoid the probate taxes. I mean, if you had an accident, say, on Red Mesa, at least the house would not go to the bank, right? Everyone laughed then, even me. It was just a dark joke. But sitting here now, with the smell of burnt rubber in my nose and a tracker hidden under my car, that joke did not feel funny anymore. It felt like a rehearsal. The garage was cold, but the memory of the last few weeks made sweat prickle on the back of my neck. The silence in the house felt heavy, loaded with the echoes of conversations I had tried to ignore. It had started 2 weeks ago, right at my kitchen table. Ryan had come over for lunch, which was rare enough to make me suspicious. He had slid a thick envelope across the granite countertop, his face arranged in a mask of practiced concern. It is just a limited power of attorney. Mom, he had said, flashing that boyish grin that used to melt my heart. So I do not have to bug you every time a tenant needs a leaky faucet fixed. It will save you so much stress. I might have signed it if Nora had not dropped by that afternoon. She put on her reading glasses, scanned the first page, and looked up at me with eyes like flint. Maggie, this is not for fixing faucets, Nora warned, her voice low and dangerous. This grants him the power to liquidate. He could sell your rental properties and wire the money to any account he chooses. Do not sign this. When I told Ryan I would not sign, the mask slipped. The transformation was ugly and instant. You do not trust your own son, he stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. I am trying to help you. You are getting too old to manage this alone, God. You are so stubborn. He swept his arm across the table, sending a ceramic fruit bowl crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering pottery seemed to hang in the air long after he stormed out, leaving me standing over the shards in a terrifying silence. A few days later, the tension morphed into something more insidious. We were having dinner. Ryan, Kelsey, and I. Kelsey was picking at her salad, her eyes scanning my living room with a possessive glint. We really need to knock out that south wall, she said, gesturing with her fork as if the renovation were already scheduled. The lighting is terrible for my videos. It would make a perfect content room. When we move in, obviously. I paused, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. When you visit, I corrected, my voice tight. She blinked, exchanging a quick, knowing look with Ryan. Right. Visit. But eventually, it is just logical. Why let a big house go to waste? Ryan chimed in then, his tone shifting from angry to patronizing, like a parent speaking to a confused toddler. Mum, why don't you just retire? Sell a few of the rentals, put the cash in a joint account with me. I can watch it for you. You should be resting, not acting like a landlord. It sounded protective, but it felt like a cage closing around me. That was the night I finally listened to Nora. She'd been pestering me for months about the security gaps. Just one more camera. Maggie, she had insisted, in the garage. It is a high theft area for expensive tools. Just do it for me. I relented, allowing the technician to install a small unit with a directional microphone near the workbench. I told myself it was for burglars. I never thought I would be the one spying on my own flesh and blood. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place yesterday. When I mentioned I was driving up to Red Mesa alone to prep the lake house for the transfer, Ryan's demeanor flipped. The sullen, aggressive man vanished, replaced by the sweet son I remembered from years ago. You are going up the pass alone, he asked, his eyes widening with what looked like genuine fear. Yes. Just for 2 days, I said. Let me help. He said, jumping up to change a light bulb I had not even noticed was out. He was frantic to be useful. And I simply cannot let you drive that car without a look over. The brakes have been squeaky. Right. I will check them. He was insistent. He practically demanded to keep my keys overnight. I need to run it on the highway. He argued, his grip on the keys white-knuckled. Just to be absolutely sure it handles the speed. Please, Mum. For my peace of mind, I let him take the keys. It seemed like such a small thing. While he was gone with my car, Kelsey dropped by. She brought a bottle of expensive red wine, pouring me a glass that was far too full. Relax, Maggie, she cooed, sitting uncomfortably close to me on the sofa. You work so hard. You need to enjoy this trip. Just let go. She took a sip, her eyes drifting to the hallway where I kept the filing cabinet. By the way, did you update those insurance policies? Ryan was worried. If something happens on those cliffs, we just want to make sure everything is sorted. The wine turned sour in my mouth. I forced a smile, burying the scream that was building in my throat. I pushed the fear down, telling myself I was being a paranoid old woman. But standing in the garage now, looking at the dark oil stain where my son had knelt just hours ago, I knew Nora was right. I knew the something wrong had finally arrived, and it was holding a wrench. The morning sun was just beginning to burn off the frost on the driveway when I dropped my microfiber cloth. It fluttered under the chassis of the SUV, landing near the rear axle. I sighed, my knees cracking as I knelt on the cold pavement to retrieve it. As I reached out, my knuckles grazed something that did not belong there. It was smooth, hard, and cold. I frowned, tilting my head to see better. There, tucked away on the inside of the frame, was a small, white plastic disc. It was about the size of a quarter, adhered to the metal with a glob of industrial glue. It was not a car part. I pried it loose with my fingernails, the adhesive giving way with a sticky snap, holding it in my palm. I pulled out my phone and typed the brand name stamped on the back into the search bar. The result loaded instantly: precision Bluetooth tracker. Locate your keys, wallet, or bag in seconds. A cold flush went through my body, sharper than the morning air. This was not for keys. This was for stalking. My hands began to shake, the plastic rattling against my wedding ring. "Mom," I jumped, shoving the device deep into the pocket of my fleece jacket just as Ryan strolled around the corner of the house. He was holding 2 steaming mugs, wearing that easy, relaxed expression that I had adored for decades. "You ready?" he asked, extending a mug toward me. I made it black. "Just how you like it." Yes, I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and brittle to my own ears. "Just doing a final check. Thank you for the coffee." "No problem," he said, taking a sip of his own. "You sure you do not want me to drive you? The pass can be tricky." "I will be fine." I lied. I need to clear my head. I did not go to the lake house. Instead, I drove straight to the other side of town, to North Ridge Auto Lab. I needed a mechanic who did not know my son. On the drive over, the unease in my gut turned into genuine terror. Every time I pressed the brake pedal, it felt soft, spongy, like stepping into a bowl of overcooked oatmeal. The travel distance was too long, at a red light. I had to stomp down hard to stop, and I heard it, a faint, high-pitched hiss of air escaping. My husband died because of brakes. I knew what failure felt like. When I pulled into the shop, I was sweating despite the heater being off. Luis, a mechanic with grey stubble and grease-stained coveralls, put the car up on the lift. I waited in the plastic chair in the lobby, clutching the tracker in my pocket, until Luis waved me into the bay. His face was grim. "Mrs. Caldwell," Luis said, pointing up at the undercarriage with a flashlight. "Come look at this." He guided my gaze to the black rubber line running to the rear caliper. Liquid was weeping from it, dripping slowly onto the floor. "You are lucky you did not hit the mountain yet," Luis said, his voice low. "With this leak, one hard stop on a steep grade, and you would have lost all pressure. You would have gone right off the edge." "Is it old age?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Luis shook his head. "Rubber rots. It cracks. It does not slice itself." He traced the beam of light over a clean, straight incision in the hose. "This is a cut, a very sharp blade. Someone nicked it just enough so it would fail under stress, not immediately." This was not an accident. The air left my lungs. Can you fix it? I should call the police, Louise said, looking at me seriously. No, I said, too quickly. Not yet, please. Louise, just replace the line so I can drive safely. But I want the old part. Put it in a bag for me. Do not throw it away. While Louise worked, I went back to the waiting room and pulled out the white disc. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped my phone. I opened the SafeTrack app that Nora had made me install years ago. I selected Add New Device and held the tracker near the screen. It chimed. Device detected. This device is already registered to another account. Owner ER, Caldwell, 1989, at the rest of the email was obscured by asterisks. But I did not need to see it. Ryan was born in 1989. I took a screenshot, my finger hovering over the button. The image on the screen blurred as tears filled my eyes. I thought of Ryan at 5 years old, sobbing into my shoulder because his goldfish had died. I thought of the man standing in my driveway with a cup of coffee, smiling while knowing he had just sent me to my death. He had calculated my lifespan against the value of a lake house. I did not cry. The tears receded, replaced by a cold, hard stone in my chest. I paid Louise, took the plastic bag containing the sliced brake line, and drove home. I did not call Ryan. I did not answer his text, asking if I had made it to the pass. I pulled into the driveway, the house looming over me like a stranger. I walked straight to my home office, locked the door, and sat down at my computer. For the first time in 3 years, I typed in the password for the security camera system Nora had installed. The screen flickered to life, loading the archives. I was not a mother anymore. I was a witness. The glow of the computer monitor was the only light in the room, casting long, spectral shadows against the bookshelves. I clicked the mouse, my finger hovering over the play button. The video file was dated last night, 10:14 p.m. On the screen, the garage door opened. Ryan drove my SUV inside, the headlights flaring briefly before cutting out. He stepped out of the car, and the high-definition camera Nora had insisted on installing captured every detail. He did not look like my son. He looked like a thief. He paused, scanning the corners of the garage, his eyes passing right over the hidden lens nestled between 2 boxes of holiday decorations. Satisfied he was alone, he walked to his backpack on the workbench. He pulled out a folding knife and a roll of black tape. The microphone picked up the sharp click of the blade locking into place. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He slid under the rear of the car. I watched. My breath caught in my throat as his legs shifted. Then, his voice drifted through the speakers, low but crystal clear. One bad break on Red Mesa. Who is going to prove otherwise? Gravity does the work for me. He grunted, the sound of metal scraping against rubber filing the room. Insurance pays out. The lake house title clears, and everything is finally tidy. I felt bile rise in my throat. He was talking about my death as if it were a chore to be completed, like taking out the trash. He slid out from under the car, wiping the blade on his jeans. He hopped up onto the workbench, swinging his legs, and pulled out his phone. He dialed, and a moment later, he put it on speaker. Kelsey's voice filled my home office. "Is it done?" she asked. "Yeah," Ryan said, examining his fingernails. "I taped the tracker to the frame, too, just to be sure. I want to know exactly when. You know. It happens." I have a draft post ready for Facebook. A grieving son needs to be prompt with the tragic news. Kelsey giggled. It was a wet, ugly sound. You are terrible. But, hey, at worst, she just breaks a leg. She is sturdy. There was a pause, and her tone shifted to something colder. Although, if she goes over the edge, she probably won't suffer long. It is a kindness, really. She's getting so slow. The room felt like it had plunged into sub-zero temperatures. I did not scream. I did not throw the monitor across the room. Instead, I clicked the mouse again. Pause. Rewind. Select new file. I went back months. I became a ghost haunting my own life, watching moments I had lived through but never truly seen. There was a clip from 3 months ago in the kitchen. Ryan was leaning against the counter, eating a sandwich I had made him. As soon as I walked out of the frame to answer the door, he turned to Kelsey. God, she just lives so long, he muttered, chewing with his mouth open. She is going to spend every cent of that inheritance on medical bills if she keeps going. She is just an ATM that knows how to cook, Kelsey replied, not even looking up from her phone. I clicked another file. 2 months ago, Kelsey was on the back patio, talking to a friend on her cell. Oh, the lake house is basically ours, she bragged, twirling a lock of hair. I convinced Ryan to push for the transfer before the wedding. We are going to gut it. It smells like old people and desperation. Then, the final blow. A video from last Thanksgiving. We had hosted a few of Ryan's friends. I remembered this night. I had gone upstairs early with a headache. On the screen, the living room was full of laughter. My mom? Ryan said, holding a beer. Do not listen to her. She is just a senile old woman. She forgets where she is half the time. If she says I owe her money, she is hallucinating. The room on the screen erupted in laughter. My son laughed the loudest. I stopped the video. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at the reflection of my face in the dark monitor. I looked old. I looked tired. But I no longer looked like a victim. I opened my desk drawer and took out a fresh legal pad and a pen. I sat up straight, my spine stiffening against the back of the chair. I wrote down the date. I wrote down the timestamp. I transcribed the quotes, word for word. One bad break on Red Mesa, tracker to the frame. Senile old woman. I noted the serial number of the tracker I had found. I wrote down the name of the garage where Luis worked and his contact information. I built a timeline of hate, minute by minute. The pain that had threatened to crush me 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They wanted the lake house. They wanted the inheritance. You want a tragedy. I whispered to the empty room. I will give you a tragedy. I closed the notebook. It was time to call Nora. I drove straight to Nora's office, a small brick building downtown, sandwiched between a bakery and a dry cleaner. I did not knock. I walked past the receptionist, marched into Nora's private room, and placed the items on her mahogany desk, one by one. The USB drive containing the security footage. The white plastic tracker still sticky with adhesive. The screenshot of the email account. And finally, my notebook, filled with timestamps and quotes. I sat down in the leather chair opposite her and folded my hands. I said nothing. Nora looked at me, her brow furrowing, then looked at the pile. She picked up the USB drive without a word and plugged it into her laptop. For the next 20 minutes, The only sound in the room was the hum of the hard drive and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I watched Nora's face. She started out confused, then shocked, and finally, her expression hardened into something made of stone and fury. When the video of Ryan taping the brake line finished playing, Nora slowly took off her reading glasses. Her hand was trembling slightly as she set them down. "Maggie," she whispered, her voice tight. This is not just a family dispute. This is conspiracy to commit murder. This is attempted homicide for financial gain. If I walk this over to the police right now, Ryan is looking at 20 years, minimum." I looked at the tracker on the desk. "I know." "Do you want me to call them?" Nora asked, her hand hovering over the phone. "We can have him in handcuffs within the hour." "No," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Not yet. If we arrest him now, he will deny it. He will say it was a prank. He will say I am a confused old woman who misunderstood. He has spent months painting me as senile to his friends." I took a deep breath, fighting the tremor in my chest. I am not ready to see my son in an orange jumpsuit today. I need to process this. Nora leaned back, studying me with her sharp, lawyer eyes. "Then what do you want? Maggie, do you want justice, or do you want safety? Because you cannot play games with a man who cuts brake lines." I met her gaze. I want him to understand. I want him to feel the weight of what he did. He thinks my life is cheap. He thinks he can trade his mother for a lake house. I want him to know the exact price of his betrayal. And I want to make sure he never, ever, touches a single thing that Thomas and I built. Nora nodded once, sharp and decisive. She spun her chair around and pulled a thick binder from the shelf behind her labelled Caldwell Living Trust. She flipped the pages aggressively until she found what she was looking for. Section 4, Paragraph C, she read aloud. "The Slayer Rule and the Bad Actor Clause. Any beneficiary who acts with intentional malice, violence, or gross negligence resulting in harm to the grantor is immediately and irrevocably removed." She looked up at me. "We are going to rewrite the schedule of assets right now. Who do you want to leave it to the Briarfield Nursing Scholarship Fund?" I said without hesitation, 80%. The other 20% goes into a locked trust for my grandchildren, if I ever have them. But the terms will state clearly that the funds go directly to the children when they turn 25. Ryan cannot access a penny. Not for tuition. Not for housing. Nothing. Done. Nora said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "But we need to address the immediate danger. I am calling Detective Miller at the Summit Ridge Sheriff's Department. He knows the Red Mesa Pass better than anyone. I will send him copies of these videos. We will ask him to open a file, but keep it quiet for 48 hours. Why, I asked. Because we need him to commit, Nora said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We need him to think he has won. I left Nora's office an hour later with a plan that felt heavy in my gut. I drove home, forcing my breathing to slow down. I walked into the kitchen and started preparing dinner, filling the house with the smell of roasted chicken and garlic. When Ryan walked in an hour later, looking tired and wary, I put on the performance of a lifetime. "Hey, honey?" I said, turning from the stove with a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "I have been thinking about what you said. About the house." Ryan froze, his eyes darting to my face. "Yeah, you are right." I sighed, wiping my hands on a towel. I am getting too old to manage the lake property. It is too much work. I think I am ready to sign it over. The change in him was instant. The wariness vanished, replaced by a greedy, predatory excitement. Really, Mum, that is a great decision. It will take so much stress off you. I want to do it properly, I said, keeping my voice steady. Let's go up there next weekend. You, me, and Kelsey. We can have a nice dinner, reminisce about your dad, and I will bring the papers. We can sign them there. It feels right. That sounds perfect, Ryan said, practically vibrating with joy. I will get time off work. I will tell Kelsey. She is going to be so happy. He walked over and hugged me. I stood stiffly in his arms, feeling the beat of his heart against my chest. It was the heartbeat of a stranger. He did not know that at that very moment. Nora was hitting send on an encrypted email to Detective Miller. He did not know that by agreeing to the trip. He had just walked into a room with no exit. I love you, Mum, he said, pulling away. I know. I lied. Go call Kelsey. As he walked into the living room, pulling out his phone, I turned back to the stove. The burner was glowing red, hot and dangerous, just like the anger that was finally beginning to burn away my grief. The road to Red Mesa is a ribbon of asphalt draped over the spine of the mountains, with cliffs on one side that drop 1,000 feet into nothingness. As I navigated the hairpin turns, my hands gripped the steering wheel of the SUV. The car handled perfectly. The brakes bit into the rotors with a reassuring firmness, thanks to the new lines Luis had installed. But under the dashboard, hidden from sight, a small black box installed by the police was silently recording every tap of the pedal and every turn of the wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror. Ryan's rusted pickup truck was right behind me, tailgating slightly. He was driving Kelsey. I could imagine them in the cab, talking about the future, about the money, about how easy this weekend was supposed to be. They thought they were escorting a helpless old woman to her final act of generosity. They did not know they were following a witness to a crime scene. When we pulled into the gravel driveway of the lake house, the water was calm and steel grey. Down by the old wooden dock, 2 men in flannel shirts were casting lines into the water. They looked like locals killing time on a Saturday afternoon. But as I stepped out of the car, the taller one adjusted his cap and gave a subtle nod. It was the signal Nora had promised. We were not alone. Inside, the house smelled of pine and dust. I moved through the rooms like an actress on a stage, my heart hammering against my ribs. While Ryan carried the luggage, I adjusted the silver picture frame on the mantelpiece. It was a photo of Thomas holding Ryan as a baby. Behind the glass, the lens of a high-definition camera was now pointed directly at the dining table. Dinner was a performance. I roasted a chicken, the same way I had for 30 years, while Kelsey sat at the island, scrolling through her phone. When we finally sat down, I brought out the manila envelope Nora had prepared. It was filled with impressive-looking legal jargon that amounted to absolutely nothing. There is a small problem, I said, feigning embarrassment as I smoothed the papers on the table. The bank said the title transfer is complicated. They might need another week to process the liens. Ryan stopped chewing. His fork clattered against the plate. A week, Mom. You said it was ready. I know. Honey, I said, looking down at my hands. I am trying. But these things take time. Ryan leaned forward, his eyes hard and impatient. We do not have time. Mom, honestly, it is better if you sign everything today. We can notarize it later. I mean, God forbid. If something happens to you, we would be stuck in probate hell for months. The air in the kitchen seemed to freeze. He had said it. He had vocalized the deadline he had set for my life. Kelsey chimed in, taking a sip of wine. Exactly. Maggie. Plus, we need to get contractors in here. No offense, but this place is ancient. Once it is ours, I am going to gut it. Open concept, modern glass. Get rid of all this dark wood. It is depressing. She was talking about destroying the home Thomas had built with his own hands. I felt a flash of white-hot rage, but I forced it down, letting it fuel my resolve. You are worried about something happening to me? I asked, meeting Ryan's gaze with a small, confused smile. Why would you worry? You checked the car yourself. Do you not trust the brakes you fixed? Ryan blinked, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the panic underneath. Then he forced a laugh. Of course I trust them. I am just saying. You know, life is unpredictable. You are always so paranoid. I watched them eat, dissecting their expressions. Every time the conversation turned to the future, to my absence, their eyes lit up. It was a hunger. They were not just waiting for me to die, they were banking on it. If I did not have this camera recording every word, if I did not have the cut brake line in a bag, they would eventually convince the world I was just a senile woman who drove off a cliff. Later that night, the house settled into silence. I went out to the back porch for fresh air, leaving the back door unlocked for 3 minutes as instructed. In the shadows, one of the fishermen moved silently up the steps. I handed him the plastic bag containing the white tracker I had found under my car yesterday. He took it with a gloved hand, securing the evidence that would likely hold Ryan's fingerprints, and vanished back into the dark. I went upstairs to my bedroom but did not sleep. I lay on top of the covers, listening. The sound of voices drifted up from the living room. I pulled out my phone and opened the app connected to the camera in the picture frame downstairs. Ryan and Kelsey were sitting on the sofa. Ryan was nursing a beer. She is acting weird. Ryan muttered. Do you think she knows she does not know anything? Kelsey scoffed. She is just hesitant about giving up control. Look, we just need to get through tomorrow. We will follow her down the mountain. If the car handles it, then we just try something else later. But that SUV is a death trap anyway. We need to get rid of it as soon as the insurance check clears. Yeah, Ryan said, his voice cold. Sooner or later. Gravity wins. I turned off the phone screen. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. But I let them fall. Tonight, I would mourn the son I thought I had. Tomorrow, I would deal with the monster sleeping on my sofa. The morning mist was still clinging to the pine trees when I stepped out onto the porch with my travel mug. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. I walked toward the gravel driveway, intending to get a jacket from the back seat of my SUV. I stopped dead in my tracks. Ryan was crouched by the front driver's side tire. He was not looking at the tread. His hand was reaching deep into the wheel well. When he heard my footsteps on the gravel, he jerked back as if he had touched a hot stove. He shoved something small into the pocket of his hoodie, his face flushing a deep, guilty red. Ryan, I asked, keeping my voice level. What are you doing? He stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. I I was just checking the tire pressure. You know, for the trip back down, it looked a little low. You checked everything yesterday in town, I said, stepping closer. Why do you need to check the brakes again? I just wanted to be sure, he stammered, avoiding my eyes. You can never be too safe with these mountain roads. Seriously, Mom, you should thank me. Thank you. Ryan, I said. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. He nodded, relieved that I had seemingly bought the lie, and hurried back into the house. As soon as the screen door slammed, I knelt by the tire. I reached up, my fingers tracing the cold metal of the frame until I felt it. A new bump. Smaller than the last one. I pulled it free. It was a sleek, black square, a newer model of GPS tracker. I stood up and turned directly toward the birdhouse hanging on the nearby oak tree, where I knew the undercover team had positioned a lens. I held the tracker up, waiting a beat to ensure they got a clear shot, and then crushed it into my pocket. I walked to the edge of the dock and pulled out the satellite phone Nora had given me. I dialed the secure number. "This is Margaret Caldwell," I said into the receiver. "Subject planted a secondary device. Serial number 8492 Alpha. Time is 7:45 in the morning. He is escalating. Copy that. Mrs. Caldwell." The officer's voice crackled back. "Stay calm. We are recording." I walked back into the house. The fear that had gripped me for days was gone, burned away by a cold, clarifying anger. I found Ryan and Kelsey in the living room. They were drinking coffee, looking at a travel brochure for Italy. They were planning a vacation with my money. "Sit down," I said. Ryan looked up, confused by my tone. "We are sitting." "Mum?" What as I tossed the black tracker onto the coffee table, it landed with a hard plastic clatter right on top of their brochure. "When did you put this on my car?" I asked. Ryan stared at the device. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That is just a telemetry device. For the insurance, it gets you a discount if you drive safe." "A discount?" I repeated. I picked up the remote and pointed it at the television mounted above the fireplace. I had synced my phone to it earlier. I pressed play. The video from my garage 3 nights ago filled the screen. The audio was crisp. Ryan's voice boomed through the living room. "One bad break on Red Mesa. Who is going to prove otherwise? Insurance pays out. Everything is finally tidy." Ryan's face drained of all color. He looked like a corpse. Kelsey gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mom? Wait. I can explain." Ryan stuttered, standing up, his hands shaking. I was just venting. "It was a joke, a dark joke. A joke," I asked, stepping closer. "Was it a joke when you sliced my brake line with a box cutter Luis at the shop, saved the hose?" Ryan. He saw the cut. He gave it to me in a bag. No. No. He whispered. "Was it a joke when you registered the first tracker to your email address at Caldwell, 1989? I continued, my voice rising. "Was it a joke when you called me a senile old woman who was taking too long to die?" Kelsey burst into tears. "Maggie, please. We were worried about you. We wanted to track you to make sure you were safe on the road. It was a stupid prank to scare you into not driving anymore. Please, do not make this a big deal." I looked at her. "Stop crying. Kelsey, you are destroying your makeup." I turned back to Ryan. "You wanted the lake house. You wanted the inheritance. You thought you could trade my life for a down payment on your lifestyle. Ryan's shock shattered into rage. He kicked the coffee table, sending the mugs flying. You crazy old witch, he screamed, his veins bulging in his neck. You have been spying on me. In my own house, I checked the kitchen. I checked the garage corners. I know where you put those cameras Nora made you buy. How did you get that angle? He stopped, chest heaving, realizing what he had just said. Thank you. Ryan, I said softly. You just confirmed for the police that you knew the layout of the security system and actively tried to avoid it. That proves premeditation. The silence that followed was deafening. He looked at me, and for the first time, he did not see a mother. He saw a judge. You are a traitor, Ryan screamed, hurling his house keys onto the coffee table with a violence that chipped the wood. You are the one betraying this family. I am going back to town. I am getting a lawyer who will prove you are insane. He stormed out. The front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Kelsey did not follow him. She sat curled in the armchair, mascara running down her cheeks. Maggie, please, she sobbed. I did not know he was going to cut the line. I thought he was just venting. You have to tell the police I was just scared. I ignored her. I walked to the porch and watched Ryan's rusted pickup truck roar out of the driveway, kicking up a cloud of gravel. He was driving fast, too fast. As his taillights disappeared around the bend, a dark realization hit me. Ryan had spent months obsessing over my brakes, but he had ignored his own. He had told me a dozen times he did not have the money to flush his brake fluid or change his pads. He was angry. He was driving recklessly, and he was heading straight for the steepest descent in Colorado. My phone buzzed. It was Detective Miller from Summit Ridge. We have eyes on him. Mrs. Caldwell? Miller said. My team at the lake is tailing him. We have the video evidence, the tracker, and the testimony from the mechanic. I am getting the warrant signed now. We will pick him up before he hits the highway. I walked back to the dining table and sat down. The second black tracker sat there like a dark accusation. I stared at it. My son had calculated the exact physics of my death. He had imagined my car plummeting, my body broken. An hour passed. Outside, the bright morning sun was swallowed by grey clouds rolling off the peaks. The lake turned the colour of bruised iron. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Kelsey was still sniffling, checking her phone every 30 seconds. Do you think he will do something stupid? She whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my face devoid of pity. For the first time in his life, I said, he has to take responsibility for his own momentum. 90 minutes later, the phone rang again. It was Miller. His voice was urgent. Mrs. Caldwell, the situation has escalated. Patrol units tried to flag him down for speeding near the mile 6 marker. He refused to yield. He is doing 80 in a 40-mile-per-hour zone. We are in pursuit, but we are keeping distance because of the curves. I gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white. Mile 6. That was the start of the Devil's Elbow switchbacks. It was the exact spot he had mentioned in his joke about gravity winning. I closed my eyes. I could see the road. I could smell the burning rubber. I could feel the terror of a pedal going to the floor and finding nothing there. The clock on the wall ticked. Each second was a hammer blow. 2 hours. 2 hours and 45 minutes. 3 hours after I had pulled that tracker from my wheel well. The phone rang for the third time. The sound was shrill, cutting through the stagnant air of the cabin. Kelsey stopped breathing. I answered. "Is he dead?" I asked. "He is alive," Miller said, and I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "But it is over. He lost control at the lower switchback. His brakes overheated. He tried to corner, spun out, and slammed into the concrete Jersey barrier. The truck vaulted the rail but slid down a dirt embankment. It did not go off the cliff. Was anyone else hurt?" "A sedan coming up the hill had to swerve and hit the ditch. Minor injuries, whiplash mostly. But your son, he is pinned. Fire and rescue is cutting him out now. He is conscious. And then he is going to the hospital under police guard." Miller stated firmly, "We are charging him with malicious destruction of property, reckless endangerment, flight from an officer, and attempted assault. And once we process that brake line you gave us, we will add attempted murder." I hung up the phone. I looked at the empty chair where my husband used to sit. My son had set a trap for me. A trap made of greed and gravity. But he had forgotten that gravity does not take sides. It just pulls down whatever is falling. "Get your things. Kelsey," I said quietly. "The police will want to speak to you." She began to wail, but I felt nothing. The cord was cut. 3 weeks later, I walked into the visitation room of the Summit Ridge Detention Center wearing my simple grey wool coat. The air inside smelled of bleach and despair. I sat down on the metal stool, separated from my son by a thick pane of scratched glass. Ryan sat opposite me. His right shoulder was heavily bandaged, and a strip of white gauze was taped across his forehead, covering the stitches from where his head had struck the steering wheel. He looked gaunt, his eyes darting between anger and a desperate, childlike confusion. His public defender, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, leaned toward the microphone. "Mrs. Caldwell," he began, his voice soft, trying to evoke sympathy. "Ryan is struggling. He understands he made mistakes. But if we could perhaps revisit the statement regarding the brake line. If you could testify that it might have been a misunderstanding, we could aim for probation. He is your son." I did not look at the lawyer. I kept my eyes fixed on Ryan. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick file folder. I placed it on the steel counter with a heavy thud. Inside were the USB drive with the videos, the photos of the cut hose, Luis's sworn affidavit, and the printed logs from the SafeTrack application. "I am not here to revisit anything," I said, my voice steady. "I am here to ensure there are no misunderstandings left." Ryan leaned forward, wincing as his shoulder shifted. "Mum, come on. I was just trying to scare you. I wanted you to stop driving that death trap. The accident at Red Mesa. That was just a scenario. I never meant for you to actually get hurt." I reached into the folder and pulled out a digital recorder. I pressed play. Ryan's voice, arrogant and clear, filled the small booth. "The lake house will be ours, clean and clear, after the insurance pays out. Just waiting for gravity to do the work." Ryan's face went pale. The lawyer closed his file, realizing he had nothing to work with. "The day you took a knife to my brake line," I said, looking directly into his eyes, "you did not just cut a piece of rubber. You severed the last tie connecting you to this family. You bet your life on physics. Ryan, the crash you had, that was not my curse. That was life teaching you that momentum works both ways." Ryan started to shake. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the terrified realization that he was not going home. "Mum, please. I am sorry. I will change. I promise. You will have time to change," I replied cold, but not with my help. Nora and I finalized the updates to the Caldwell Living Trust yesterday. You have been removed as a beneficiary. All assets, the rentals, the savings, the lake house are now in a protected fund. I leaned closer to the glass and listened to me carefully. If you and Kelsey ever have children, if I ever have grandchildren, the trust will pay for their education and their start in life. But the money goes directly to them when they turn 25. It skips you entirely. You will never touch a single cent of what Thomas and I built. Ryan slumped back in his chair, his mouth open in silent shock. That hit him harder than the jail cell. I had taken away his future leverage. The trial 2 months later was short. The prosecutor played the video of Ryan taping the tracker to my car. He presented the forensic report on the sliced brake line. He showed the data log from the police device in my SUV, proving I had driven safely while Ryan had driven recklessly. It was a portrait of a clumsy, greedy malice. The judge was stern. He sentenced Ryan to 8 years in state prison for attempted assault, malicious destruction of property, and reckless endangerment. Redemption. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, looking down from the bench, "will come from how you serve your time, not from your mother's wallet." I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. Nora was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. She took my arm. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. I looked back at the heavy oak doors of the courthouse. I regret that he made me do it. But no. I chose the only revenge that didn't kill the human part of me. I brought the truth into the light, and I cut the financial cord that was choking us both. I drove back to the lake house alone. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the water. I parked in the driveway and walked into the garage. My SUV sat there, clean and solid. I ran my hand over the hood. I opened the door, sat in the driver's seat, and placed my hands on the wheel. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the silence. There was no ticking bomb. There was no tracker. There was no secret plot. I started the engine. I backed out and turned toward the Red Mesa Pass. I drove up the winding road, taking the curves with precision, not as a victim escaping a trap, but as a woman driving into the rest of her life on her own terms. Thank you so much for tuning into this story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with our community. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help these stories reach even more people.